for the start of the TA, a 2-hour trip. The Aotearoa brevet is an event that is held in late January and has to be completed within 30 days. But outside this, you can go as slow as you want. We did it in 57 days. Effectively, this is a series of trails and cycle tracks that have links together with roads, some sealed and some gravel. It is 3,100 kilometers long with 33,000 meters of climbing, of which around 60% is either paved road or cycle tracks. The remaining 40% being a mixture of gravel, beach, and river, with only a small amount of dirt and rock. It can be completed on almost any touring or gravel bike, with either panniers or bike packing setup. But the wider your tyres, the easier you will find the off-road sections. We were on Surly Moonlander fat bikes with 120mm tyres and 2 rear panniers each. Our talk mainly concentrates on the off-road trails as they are what we enjoy.
We arrived at Cape Reinga in wonderful sunshine and were almost blinded by how green everything is after shriveled Australia. Cape Reinga is a sacred place for the Maori. A quick trip down to the lighthouse at Cape Reinga for the obligatory start photo, and we were off, heading for 90 Mile Beach. This took us past the massive white sand dunes with coachloads of tourists sand surfing. Then a cycle down a stream, which got much deeper than we expected in places, took us to 90 Mile Beach. We had chosen our start time to coincide with the outgoing tide, so we were cycling on hard sand. But we're a bit later than we'd hoped because we were so tired, so we weren't going to make the whole distance in one day. It was fun for the first 30 minutes, zooming along at 20 kilometers an hour, looking at birds and shells and waves, then more birds, more shells, more waves, and more birds, more, well, you get the picture. I was so bored. You could, however, try cycling with your eyes shut, which is interesting, although safer if we only did it one at a time. Every now and then, one of the tourist buses would roar past on the edge of the waves, so that when we stopped for a break, we made sure our bikes were upright and visible. We stopped for the night at Aotearoa camp and cabins about 2/3 of the way along the beach. A not quite legal site, something about planning permission, I think. We still had 35 kilometers to do the next day and had to wait for the tide to go out. We left a bit early, which put us on the soft sand that was hard going, even with our fat tyres. Luckily, when we finally reached Aotearoa, we were able to give our bikes a really good wash to get rid of all the sand and salt. We had been luckier than most in that we had a tailwind all the way down the beach. But even so, riding on the soft sand was punishing on my knees on the first day of a tour.
We are getting used to the loud bird song as we wake up, and the vegetation and views from the road and gravel tracks. Then we crossed the river Wragge-Morley, where we stayed in a chalet with wonderful views of the bay. We were on quiet tarmac roads and gravel roads for a while, and after all the flat sand and sea, it was wonderful to see all the colours of the vegetation of the Herikino forest and to actually cycle up a hill. This got us into the rhythm of lots of short, sharp hills that are the character of North Island. We then head up to the Waipua forest to see the few remaining kauri trees. They have wide, tall trunks with no lower branches, which made them excellent for any type of construction. Virtually the whole of North Island was cleared and exported in the late 19th and early 20th century. This has now left lots of good agricultural land, but at the expense of a whole forest. We saw the oldest remaining kauri tree, Panemahuta, 2,000 years old and over 51 meters tall. The landscape we passed was varied, from azure blue sea and white sand 1 minute to lush green farmland the next, interspersed with rainforest full of tree ferns and trees dripping with bromeliads. There is manuka flowering everywhere and lots of hives cashing in on the high prices of manuka honey. Lorries and forklifts delivering extra supers for the hives all down the road. From here, we were cycling on a selection of surfaces from graded gravel, smooth rocks, lumpy rocks, hard-packed mud, and tarmac. We spent the night in Waipura Forest Camp and were taken out for a night walk in the forest with a Maori guide. We heard kiwi calling, but unfortunately didn't see them. But the fireflies made up for this. Most of the time we had been cycling, we had smelt the most wonderful but very strong fragrance. It turned out to be the cabbage trees, which were in full flower 2 months earlier than normal. Some varied cycling along river trails and up over hills got us to the Cowrie Museum at Matahoke, which has very well presented displays on how effectively they managed to destroy a whole ecosystem. However, it is portrayed as the great triumph of the early settlers, and there is virtually no mention of the local indigenous people, the Maori.
During the TA Brevet, when there are a lot of cyclists on the route, they get a ferry across from Puto Point to Helensville on the outskirts of Auckland. But this wasn't going to be an option for us, as you have to book the whole boat. So we had to head inland and cycle around the bay through cattle farming country. When it rains in New Zealand, you know all about it, and they know all about it at the moment. This traffic is why we kept off the main roads as much as possible. On our detour around to Auckland, we cycle on beautiful, very hilly countryside, on tarmac lanes and gravel roads, and the occasional, terrifying busy road, where I discovered at full volume what some New Zealand drivers think of cyclists. The language was an education. We stayed on a farm and in a large tent in the garden of a warm shower host. It was all very steep and very hot.
10 days after we had set off, we headed into Auckland on a mixture of road and cycle track. We just stayed one night as we're not good at cities and usually can't wait to get out of them. The next morning, we get to go through a couple of nice parks before following the busy roads as we head out, eventually clearing the outskirts and back into countryside. There is a choice of route here, and we decided to head for the east coast past large fields of fruit orchards, vineyards, all protected by very high hedges. We passed through a wetlands nature reserve with lots of birds, including falcons, waders, yellowhammers, and pupeko, and many others. There's a mangrove swamp between the cycle path and the sea. We then headed on the inland on the Hauraki rail trail, which runs parallel to the Coromandel range of hills. Lots of milking cows along this trail. As it is a rail trail, it is flat and easy cycling, especially with a tailwind. We passed through several small towns, so we didn't need to carry much food.
Actually, I ought to apologise now to anyone from New Zealand about our pronunciation of the place names. We have been trying, but we keep getting it wrong. Leaving roads thankfully behind, we headed off on the Waitako River Trail. It's a really narrow and windy mountain bike track with edges that drop straight down to the river. There was also boardwalk sections across the boggy areas, luckily wider than the usual UK offering, although still not my favourite thing. A little way along, we came to the Arapuni Dam and the powerhouse, which was camouflaged in World War II to prevent Japanese bombing. And our first long swing bridge. We stayed at the well-known Arapuni Backpackers, where I was able to pick vegetables from their garden while Bernie got the barbecue going. The Waitako River Trail got a bit more technical after this, and was certainly above my pay grade. It was probably great fun on an unloaded mountain bike with a proper mountain biker sitting on top of it. Lovely river views though. It was hard work and with a lot of hauling, and it was difficult to get in and out of with the narrow gates. We started to get the hang of the long swing bridges, but went across one at a time as the bikes made them bounce a bit. There were also 4 flights of these steps, which meant unloading the bikes again and carrying all the luggage down. It is said at the start of the trail that it took 9 hours to walk it. I was wondering how long it took to push the bike along it. We soon discovered. Luckily, all good things come to an end, and we were soon back on the wide forestry tracks.
We turned onto a section that was just like a muddy Devon track and came across our next challenge. The Aotearoa swing bridge is very narrow and has a one-person limit. I struggled to get our bikes across even without any luggage. The wire mesh on the sides was missing in places, and a couple of weeks later it failed its load safety test and was closed while it was repaired. Immediately after is a steep gully, but after that was nice wide gravel tracks, which took us to the centre of North Island, in a charming wooded dell with lovely gnarly trees, very atmospheric. Later we were racing along a gravel track and hit a deep hole and lost 3 out of 4 of our panniers. We camped that night at Cape Reinga, near the beginning of the timber trail. The DOC campsite has an honesty box. The DOC is the Department of Conservation. Our homemade tarp kept us dry, and I was just able to repair the holes in our panniers made by bouncing down the road.
Oops, that was an antique crawler. The next day found us on the timber trail single track, and for us, one of the highlights of the trip. The track wasn't that narrow or difficult, and although it was a long climb, it wasn't too steep. So we could enjoy the wonderful atmospheric trees and the tree ferns, all dripping with luminous green mosses. It was much cooler in the damp atmosphere under the trees. We initially climbed 450 meters in 17 kilometers, then a gentle roll through absolutely stunning native forest. If we were to do it again, we'd go more slowly and take 2 days, stopping at Pero campsite where we'd had a picnic lunch. We crossed 5 swing bridges. One was 141 meters long and the highest in North Island, with fantastic views up and down the valley. The descent was something else though, much steeper and rougher, and I was really glad of the fat tires. And it was exhausting as it kept going up again. Then, just when our legs needed a rest, we came across the old timber tramway with its tramway loop elevator to get the trains up and down the steep bit. And it was easy after that. That's part of the tunnel, that's part of the loop. Arriving in the tiny hamlet of Ongaroo at our accommodation in the Timber Trail Centre, we had the surreal experience of sitting under an old walnut tree, being served tea in a silver tea service, and then having a home-cooked supper in the old wooden schoolhouse.
We were back on roads and gravel for a couple of days, making our way to Blue Duck Station on the Whanganui River, where we had arranged a 3-day canoeing trip down to Pipariki. Just before we had arrived in New Zealand, it had had torrential rains, which not only washed away the South Island West Coast roads, but there had also been landslides in the forest trails on the Bridge to Nowhere section, so it was closed. There were 2 alternatives, either to go around on a busy road or go down the Whanganui River. So we had booked a 3-day canoeing trip from Blue Duck Station with the canoe hire company, driving our bikes around and meeting us at Pipariki. This is why we had to do the timber trail in 1 day instead of 2. On the morning of departure, we weren't sure if we would be going as there was a storm forecast in the upper catchment area of the river, Whanganui. Around 11, we were quickly briefed on how to paddle a canoe and how to get through the rapids. The last bit of advice was if you are passed by a tree, get off the river. We loaded all our kit. We set off in lovely sunshine, and after paddling in circles for 10 minutes, stuck in an eddy, we set off gently downstream. We were successfully shot our first rapid, paddled straight down the V, paddling as hard as we could and managed not to get sucked into the whirlpools on the far side. This was great fun. The river flows through a deep gorge with ferns and mosses clinging to the steep sides. The rapids become more frequent, so is there no time to relax. There are peacocks calling from the wooded cliff tops, one of the many species introduced by the settlers that have established wild populations. We spent a lovely afternoon arriving at John Cool campsite, where we beached the canoe, pulling it right up out of the water and tying it to the line. We pitch our tarp using our 2 paddles at one end and a bench at the other. It was designed to go between the bikes, so we don't carry poles. Next day, we canoe to Bridge to Nowhere Lodge and arrive in the pouring rain. Luckily, we booked a room and we don't have to camp. Overnight, the river rose 3 meters, and the rocks we could see from the balcony yesterday have completely disappeared, and logs are floating down the river fast. Over breakfast, we're told no one is allowed on the river today. John, our host, arranges for everyone to be taken down to Pipariki in their jet boat. Our canoe was rescued last night by people at the campsite and dragged up to a much higher ground. I assume the higher people have a system for recovering their canoes. Well, we got a free jet boat ride, which was good, and our bikes were waiting for us when we arrived.
It was now 3 weeks since we'd set off, thankfully back on the bikes at Pipariki, and using legs and not our tired arms, we headed off through Jerusalem, where there is a convent, London and Athens, all tiny hamlets that regularly get cut off by the rising river. Luckily, this original River Queen boat from the film marked a cafe as we'd run out of food. It was nice to look down on the Whanganui River from high above, from where it all looked calm and serene. We eventually arrived in the town of Whanganui, and our first rest stop in 3 weeks. This is a snow-covered volcano called Ruahine, I think. For the next few days, we were on the roads and gravel tracks, rolling through steep green farmland and amazing hills. Christmas Eve found us heading past Palmerston North and up the road from Hell. We had decorated our panniers with tinsel so the cars would see us. They knew we were there, but they still didn't pull out. Because of the closed roads and it being Christmas Eve, the road was packed and the drivers bad-tempered. We survived, just. Christmas is always difficult on tour, and we ended up staying at a roadside motel, which was nicer than it looked. And Father Christmas found us, despite there being no chimney. We were at an Airbnb in Masterton on Christmas night. Of course, everything there was shut, so the family kindly invited us to join them for Christmas supper.
After Featherston, we hit the Rimutaka rail trail, which is a significant gradient as the trains used a third rail for extra traction. As we climb up, the wind is gaining strength, and at the top, just before the tunnel, is a swing bridge. We walk across with the bikes as the wind is too strong to ride, and the bridge is moving quite a lot. Luckily, it's a brand new bridge. The tunnel at the other end is really long and very dark. The information post shows a train being blown off the old bridge. And at the far end of the tunnel was a station where passengers used to swap trains to go down to Wellington, which is what we do. We drift down into Wellington, going through a series of barriers on the various cycle paths. We have to remove our panniers at every one. The wind is so strong it blew Sarah off the cycle track. We've made it to the end of North Island, and we have a day off in Wellington and visit the museum, which has a whole floor of Maori culture and artifacts, including the Macrae Agreement contract, which was a total whitewash by the settlers and the UK government.
We just wheeled our bikes onto the inter-island ferry and crossed the notorious Cook Straits on a totally calm, glass-like sea, which is just as well as Bernie's quite a bad sailor. After rolling off in Picton, we headed up along Queen Charlotte's Drive with amazing views in the hot sunshine. Lots of holiday villages around here, and being the Christmas holidays, they were teeming with visitors. The roads were busy and not fun, but we knew a shortcut. Up to Nelson, up over the Mongatapu Pass. We knew it wasn't going to be easy. I'd heard other cyclists say, oh, well, it wasn't that bad, meaning the opposite. And the start didn't look too difficult, but it got a lot steeper and rockier, and it was very hot, and it seemed to go up and up forever. Nice views though, and you don't get these cycling along the flat. And the best bit, you get to come down the other side. Then we just followed the river and I thought, well, that was it. But we were soon heading up again. This is typical in New Zealand. If you look at the ride profile, it shows you descending for hours. But some of the barely noticed little bumps on the downhill turn out to be significant climbs. We started calling these New Zealand downhills. Then it was an easy run into Nelson, where we had been invited to stay with a warm showers host who was following my blog.
The next day, Sandy, who has also been following our blog, joins us for a ride out of town on the Great Taste Trail. The next few days are a mixture of SH6 highway and cycle track through lots of hop fields and vineyards. And as the name of the trail suggests, lots of cafes on the route to choose from and lots of cyclists, as it is the New Year holiday. We end up at Aotearoa Lake, which is a bit like a mini Lake Louise in Canada. There are plenty of sandflies and midges, so we're glad of our accommodation tonight. We have a great ride on gravel up through the southern beach woods. The Latin name is Nothofagus, which means not a beach. Before descending on gravel back down to SH6 and the holiday traffic. After Murchison, we head down a river valley on a road that turns into gravel, passing through lush pasture with the usual mix of beef, sheep and dairy. Then through native woodland, alongside a gorge and the lovely Blue River. And waterfalls. Before a climb on gravel to the Marua Saddle. Beautiful southern beach, ferns, lichen and moss everywhere. More warm showers hosts Pete and Robin put us up at Springs Junction. They live completely off-grid, but in a modern house. Pete takes us to a local forest and explains about the coloured fungus on the trees and the work they are doing to try and eradicate the rats using lines of traps through the forest. The rats, which are non-native species, destroy all the indigenous ground nesting birds.
The DOC website said to check the weather forecast before heading out on the Big River Trail. And that said, not good for 2 days, rain coming in. So we inquired at the information centre in town, but they knew nothing. So we set off anyway. There had been rockfalls here during the heavy rains earlier in the year. From the start, we can see it was going to be heavy going and a rough ride. And it was quite muddy. The trail starts as a four-wheel drive track, which becomes quite steep in places. But we just managed to ride it all. Well, tell a lie, Bernie managed to ride it all. It was quite cool today in the mist, about 10 degrees C. And it was southern beech forest here too. After the track narrows and levels out, we pass a number of mine entrances dug horizontally into the hillside. We were climbing steadily, so good views, and we crossed a lot of streams. Then we could see the big river hut high above us, looking very impressive, perched high on the hill, as we crossed through an area of settling tanks and sifting and panning flues. The hut system in New Zealand is a bit like bothies in Scotland, free to use with long drop toilets and usually tank water gathered from the roof. They vary enormously in size and quality. The big river hut will easily sleep 10 or more people, and we have it all to ourselves. We get the range fire going and cook and warm up. We had a comfortable night, but in the morning it's raining steadily. After boiling enough water to fill our bottles and make porridge for breakfast, we head out on the Warita Trail, It was cold and it was raining hard, which made the route down even more difficult and slippery. The track was narrow, often with long drop-offs at the side, and lots of streams to cross. Bernie did slide over the edge at one point, but managed to catch hold of a tree. Then some narrow and very slippery boardwalk. Halfway along, the path becomes a section of stream, with rocks and boulders to negotiate for a couple of 100 meters. And then there were the fallen trees. There were several, but this was the biggest. I had to hang on to Bernie while he swung the bikes over so he didn't go over the edge too. The consolation for me was the amazing lichens and mosses, and the forest itself was wonderful. In fact, I couldn't cycle much of it. There were too many obstacles, so I just walked my bike, which meant that I could look around and appreciate the wonderful woodlands. And aren't they great? It was vibrant green, just like that. Despite everything, it was the best day yet, except that we were so cold. My hands were so numb I couldn't change gear and could only just brake. My newish sealskin gloves were full of water like balloons, useless. It took us 5.5 hours to get to the bottom. Thankfully, the nice lady at the off-the-grid Airbnb dried everything out for us.
The next couple of days are on roads through mining areas and down to the coast at Greymouth, which is exactly that, grey and at the mouth of a river. So we moved on to Kumara, the start of the Wilderness Trail. This is a gentle rail and cycle trail with some four-wheel drive track linking together. It's all easy riding and passes through some native forest and past a number of reservoirs. If the weather is very wet, there are some river fordings that may become impassable. However, it was no problem to us. We arrived at Cowboy Paradise, which is a very strange place modelled on the Wild West, with shooting ranges and poles for dancing in the bar, but the accommodation and food was fine. The next 10 days are on the coast road, the SH6 highway. In the month before we were in South Island, heavy rains here caused lots of landslides, and sections of the road had been closed. But they all geared up for these regular occurrences, and they had it all been fixed by the time we passed through. The coast road goes up and down over many headlands and along behind the beach in between. There are some good views, with snow-covered mountains on our left and the sea on our right. We were travelling fast down this section as we had seen that there was a storm approaching, and it just started as we arrived at our B&B. Unfortunately, it was still going strong when we set off the next day, and was still stair rods when we got to Franz Josef. So we retreated to a cafe to dry off. Luckily, the sun came out in the afternoon, and we took a day off here to visit Fox Glacier and Lake Matheson with its amazing forest and reflective water, and pop up to see the Fox Glacier with Mount Cook just peeping out of the clouds behind. There are a number of wide rivers flowing off the mountains to the sea. The road eventually heads inland past lakes, and we stop and buy some jade, which is found on the island. We had lovely views of mountains and the sea as we rolled easily down the highway. Quiet now, as most people had gone back to work, and the foreign-driven camper vans tended to pull out and give us space. There was a lot of evidence of rockfalls that had been bulldozed clear. We passed Lake Reinga. Then the road started to seriously undulate in a New Zealand, i.e. steep fashion, each time going right back down to the sea level. Lots of sandflies about in this area, but we were able to watch dolphins playing near the shore. Then onto the Wanaka Rail Trail. Again, lots of people come here and hire bikes to cycle around the lakes. It was pretty and easy cycling. Cycling up to the Crown Pass, the highest point on our tour, we wished we had started earlier in the day as it was very hot. The pass is only 1,076 metres, but we were starting from sea level. The first section to Cardrona, with its old hotel, wasn't too steep, but it soon ramped up. There was no shoulder, and the road was busy, but I wasn't stopping to let them past on that hill, a hill that's that steep. They're great views from the top as always. Halfway up is the famous Bardrona fence, raising money for breast cancer research. It was a hill that just kept on giving, but we eventually plunged down the other side to busy Queenstown, full of bars and nightclubs, and mountain bike centres, as well as water sports.
Early the next morning, we were down on the quayside, loading our bikes into the hold of the paddle steamer, TSS Earnshaw. Lots of bikes were already on board. Then we set off across the lake, Wakatipu, that's the one, to Walter Peak. There is a restaurant there and you can camp. We set off on the wide, dusty gravel roads, which were well used by local farmers, so it's important to keep to the left, although every car has its own dust cloud, so you can see them coming. Wonderful views across the lake. The vegetation was very dry and brown, although we were heading up a river valley. We met several other cycle tourists, and like many in New Zealand, these two had resorted to using pool noodles to make cars give them space. The police do tend to pull you over for this. As they say, it forces cars to pull out. Well, what can you say? There were streams to fill up with water from, but not many. There were several picnic huts on the route with long drop toilets, and this one had a rainwater supply. So we stopped here for the night and shared the hut with local mice. There were lots of sandflies up here. The last
2 days in Southlands were mostly on flat road, with some paved cycle track, passing through farmland with mainly dairy cattle, and then on cycle tracks along the estuary, with lots of bird life, black swans and waders in abundance. The last bit of road into Bluff is very busy with heavy lorries until you turn off to the town, but I believe they've now put a cycle track next to this road. We arrived at Bluff and the end of the TA, where we stayed in a hotel overlooking the point. And we were there 56 days, 3,124 kilometres, 33,121 metres of climbing. But it didn't finish there. We had another 10 days before our flight home, so decided to hire a car and do some of the other cycle trails on South Island, on the east of the mountains. We did the tourist visit to Milford Sound, and then the Otago Rail Trail from Middlemarch to Clyde, followed by the Clutha River Trail, and lastly the Alps to Ocean Trail from Mount Cook to Oamaru, before driving to Christchurch to catch our flight home. Virtually all the cycle trails in New Zealand have a shuttle service associated with them, so logistics are straightforward if you only want to do 1 or 2 trails. There are a whole lot of resources that you might like to visit if you're thinking of going there. Obviously, a plug for our website, Wragge-Morley-cycles.com, which has got tours for over 20 countries on it, and blogs on flowers in various countries. And I've done a couple of blogs on building bikes, including the fat bikes seen in this trip and our current Shan Bahuki bikes designed for bike packing. Also cooking equipment and recipes and how to make the tarps and to make gaiters and things like that.
And we learned how to make the tarps at the Cycle Touring Festival.
Yeah, thanks to Brenda,
yes,
who did a workshop on it.
Yeah.
So I went home and made ourselves some. The TA Brevet, there's got 2 a website and a Facebook page, which are well worth a visit. And if you're going cycling in New Zealand in general, there are lots of other routes apart from the TA. Visit the Kennett brothers, kennett.co.nz. They are a real force for cycling in New Zealand all over, and they've done an enormous amount of work to get open access to land for cyclists. So it's fantastic. Well worth a visit that site. And if you're going on these trails, then have a look at the DOC Department for Conservation website, because they are responsible for the national parks, including campsites, huts and trails. and they provide up-to-date information on the condition of all the trails and facilities. We used some shuttle services from Kaitaia, which was real Far North tours, and the car rental was from Far North Rentals. I mean, there are other alternatives to both of those. And on the canoeing on the Whanganui River, we use Whanganui River Adventures. Again, there are other options there if you want to look for them. Okay, that's the end of our talk.
Well, thank you very much. It's worth pointing out that all of these links and resources will be available on the CTF website at the end, so you don't have to worry about scribbling them down just now. Thank you both very much. What a stunning set of photos that you've collected, and a lovely talk through all of your travels as well. So we've got some questions coming in on the Q&A chat, and did you want to show a video as well while we were waiting?
We're going to show a video that only has bike noises on it. So rather than listening to our tires go whoosh, 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 we were going to run the video and take the questions while it's running. If that's okay.
Yeah, great. I think it'll give us a real sense of what it's like to be on the road out there. So I think the first question from Brenda was, did you take your own bikes, or did you hire them when you got out there? It wasn't quite clear at the beginning.
Oh, we always take our own bikes with us.
And was there a reason you chose fat bikes for this journey? What was your thinking?
We had been cycling in Australia just before we got there, so we had the fat bikes with us, and also because I fall off an awful lot, Bernie put me on a fat bike to try and keep me on it, keep me the right way up.
I see. Okay.
I built the fat bikes specifically for a journey that we did to South America. We did 2 trips to South America, and they're really good on the volcanic sand, and they were very good on the beach too. But we now ride only 75mm wide tires, not 120mm wide tires.
Yeah. Can you see the video? Is it running okay?
Yes, we can. Yeah, it's running just fine actually. It's lovely. Yeah, I like it a lot. So we've had a few questions about the timings of the tour. So you mentioned Christmas. So you must have started this kind of early December, did you, or something?
We started on the last week in November, and went from there. So
I would really recommend that people go later, after the Christmas holidays are finished, because the roads were just so busy, it made it quite unpleasant. But we noticed that after that, it did get much nicer. So it would be much safer to go later, sort of at the end of January.
And how does the weather vary between the different times of year? So is the weather because there were several points there where, there's a rickety bridge or a tunnel. It looked like there was some points where if that bridge had been closed due to bad weather, you would have had a big detour on your hands.
Well, that can happen at any time. I mean, it's particularly bad this year in New Zealand. I mean, they've got lots of the tracks are closed at the moment because they're just flooded. So, and because, they suddenly get very heavy downpours of rain, and you can just have closures at any time, which is why you need to keep referring to the DOC website and check what's open.
And you'll also see that on the Facebook pages that people are doing this route all the time, and you'll see comments, I couldn't get through, and people there are shuttles sometimes that can get you round, or alternatives like the canoeing. And the Bridge to Nowhere route seems to be often shut because it's particularly vulnerable to bad weather. And you can, I don't know if you noticed, there was a 4-wheel drive that was helping us load onto the jet boats. His wheels were absolutely covered in mud. When it gets really wet, I mean, your wheels just stop going round. It's so mucky. So, but it's the luck of the draw, the weather. I mean, this year they've had bad luck.
I see. So you just have to be prepared for all eventualities on a trip.
Yeah, you do. I mean, but we were very lucky actually. We had good weather most of the time, and certainly we had good weather during all of the areas that would have been really difficult. Because it didn't start raining a lot until you got to the South Island, and normally South Island the rain is a lot worse than in North Island.
Not this.
It's not happened that way this year, but it's a normal way around.
So we've got a few questions in regarding accommodation and kind of logistics and stuff. So we've got one here. what were the prices like of food and accommodation? And did you pre-book accommodation in advance, or did you just kind of just turn up ad hoc? And
Well, we had to book a little bit in advance. I mean, a couple of days because of the Christmas holidays. It started to get full. And also, if you hit the time when the brevet is going down, there's 100 or 200 cyclists heading down, and suddenly all the accommodation gets booked as they go through. But if you can avoid those two things, and you can camp in a lot of places. Some people camp all the way down, depending on the weather. And warm showers works very well over there. But we did, the accommodation was similar prices to England, I think.
Yes, it was
Okay.
very similar to England.
Yeah.
But if you look at the current TA Facebook page, there have been 1 or 2 problems with some properties only accepting 2-night bookings, which limits where you can go. But you know, generally we didn't have a problem. We were only booking 1 day in advance because we never like to tie ourselves down to a time scale so that we can just take our time. But we did end up having to do the timber trail in 1 day instead of 2. We would have rather done because we had already booked ourselves into the canoe trip.
And it's worth noting that if you're going to, even if you don't canoe down the Whanganui, if you manage to ride the Bridge to Nowhere, you still need a jet boat for the last bit to get from there to the road. So you have to book that before you get there, because you've got no phone signal once you enter that area.
I see. So the phone signal's patchy in the mountains, I take it, just like the UK.
Well, just yes, anywhere that's in the middle of nowhere, the phone signal is going to be patchy.
Yeah.
But I mean, generally speaking, it wasn't too bad. I mean, most places we could get some signal, but there were 1 or 2 points where it wasn't that easy.
Okay. And so you said you had accommodation booked 1 or 2 days in advance. Did you ever have trouble carrying enough supplies to get you between kind of areas of habitation?
Not on this trip. I mean, because there are villages and places almost everywhere. So you know, the countryside is fantastic, and although there are a couple of wild bits, you were only ever about 2 days or 3 days maximum. I think 2 days was the maximum we were outside of town where we couldn't get some food. So, you know, you only had to carry 1 day's worth of food with you.
And you can generally, even if there isn't a town, there might be a house nearby or something if you really got stuck. It's not that remote. I mean, I'd imagined it being much more remote than it turned out to be.
Now, I've got an interesting question here, actually, regarding, where is it? Can't see it anymore. Oh, from Clive saying when he cycled in New Zealand, he found the police unsupportive to cyclists. Did you find the same?
No.
It wasn't. No, the police were supportive of us.
The police. Sorry.
But they were. The problem. The problem is that the laws just changed in New Zealand. But while we were there, the highway code was that cyclists shouldn't impede the traffic flow and should always move as far to the left as possible, as far as the left as it took to not impede the traffic flow. So the cars had the right of way. But now they've just changed that in 2020. And whilst you are allowed to ride in the carriageway, there is still this emphasis that you have to move towards the left as soon as you are able to do so and to allow the traffic to pass.
We did get pulled over by the police at one point, mainly because I was shaking my fist and screaming at them.
Right.
Because we were trying to do the usual ride a third out into the road as we do normally defensively because of the traffic, and the police pulled us over for it.
And we did find in the really busy holiday times, a lot of people are traveling towing boats, and their trailer is slightly wider than their car. Once or twice, the wheels of their trailers went underneath Bernie's panniers. I was following him and I could see this happen. They were so close with the car, they'd forgotten they had a wider trailer.
Wow.
So it was scary. And at that particular point, when the police pulled us over, I was literally shaking with fear and burst into tears. And the poor guy didn't know what he'd done.
Right, so just a few more questions. We probably won't have time to answer them all. Let's just, so there's a few practical ones, such as did you get many punctures on these surfaces? What tools did you take with you? Any recommendations about the types of mechanical failures you can expect on a trip like this?
Well, I had quite a few punctures. Sarah didn't have any. I had about 3 or 4, I think, which were mainly thorns that I picked up off the tracks. And in terms of tools, I normally I carry quite a good toolkit, because I like to be able to fix everything that I have. I like to be able to fix everything that that might break. But I designed the bikes to be as reliable as possible, and to make them sort of as reliable as I can. So we have, although the fat bikes have chain drive, they have roll-off gearboxes and mechanical disc brakes, and and they had tube tires, whereas now we've moved over to the Shandbar Hookies, which have belt drive, roll-off gearboxes and mechanical disc brakes
And tubeless tires.
and tubeless tires. And we did 10,000 kilometers on the first belt, 13,000 kilometers on the tires, and we've never been stopped with a puncture in 16,000 kilometers on them. So
that was cycling up the UK.
I mean, we have had punctures, but you just pull the thorn out and move on.
Wow. Okay, that's quite impressive stat.
But we haven't tried flying with them.
You haven't tried flying with tubeless tires?
Yes, because you've got the gunge in there, and if you lower the pressure, and then because they're fat tires, you've got to be able to seat them at the other end, and of course you haven't got your compressor with you.
Interesting.
It's a problem we've yet to deal with. So.
Yeah, but we'll think of the solution.
Yeah, well, if anyone in the chat has experience of that, then pop it in there, and that will get sent to Bernie and Sarah afterwards. So put your recommendations for flying with tubeless tires on there.
The nice thing about the roll-off is that you can fly and not have to worry about your derailleur getting bent.
Yes.
Yeah. Got one.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's an interesting one here as well, because as you know, e-bikes are becoming much more popular, and certainly for on-road cycling, they're now commonplace. So the world of mountain e-bikes is growing as well. Would that be a suitable choice for a trip like this, or would you have trouble?
We saw a lot of e-bikes, but depends on how clever you are at conserving your power.
I mean, because you've got 1 or 2 places where you're going to be 2 days between being able to charge up. So you're either going to need a second battery, or you're going to have to be very frugal with your battery use, or you're just going to have to ride without it for half a day or something. So for the second day.
And there's loads of comments on the chat, which I'd love you to read after the fact, but everyone's really enjoyed this talk. And I think 2 questions just to finish up on was, one, well, actually, I'll add one of my own in as well. So one is, would you say this is suitable for people who've never done any off-road cycling before, who are kind of new to mountain biking? Maybe they're experienced on-road, but this would be their first transition to off-road cycling.
I think if you were going to do it, then there are possibly 2 trails, or at least one trail I would miss, which is probably the Big River Trail. I would probably go round that.
But it would be worth walking it.
Yes.
And it wouldn't take you any longer to walk it than ride it, to be honest. I walk most of it.
and you would be able to get taxis or shuttles back to pick up your bikes from wherever you had left them. And people will look after your bikes at accommodation and stuff. So it wouldn't
I see. Yeah, that shuttle service does sound really useful.
Yeah, really useful. Really useful.
At the end, we used it when we had a car with us, and we were doing some of the trails on the east side. the Alps to Ocean Trail. We actually arranged their shuttle through a bike hire company, even though we were using our own bikes. They arranged all our accommodation. You just tell them how many days you want to take, and they pick you up at the end and bring you back to your car.
And did the same on the Aotearoa trail. That we got taken to the far end of it and just dropped off and cycled back.
So there's always someone willing to take some money for something.
Yes, of course. Yeah, yes. So we'll go into the final two questions, and I think they'll both be quick ones. This one I'm asking because I'm intrigued. I don't know what it is, but did you see a kakapo?
No, we didn't. No.
Oh, okay.
They are about, but a puteco,
A kakapo.
a kakapo. No, we didn't see a kakapo. No.
And the final question that's being asked a lot is, what's next? What's next for the?
But there's a slight argument going on.
I'm going on the Pony Express, which is a brand new ride that's been put together in North America, which goes from Kansas to California, across two mountain ranges and a couple of deserts. So,
but we haven't got the route yet. They're still finalising it. But I'm going to China.
Oh wow!
So we're arguing.
Are you going at the same time? You're splitting up. You're going to different.
No. We'll go together, but it'll be a case of tossing the coin to see who actually.
Who finishes their research first?
Yeah,
I think China might not be open enough for us to go until
a couple of years.
So it's likely that I will win, I think.
Okay. And when you say they haven't finalised the route, is that the American Cycle Touring Association? Is it?
No, it's not.
No, it's some people. I'm on a site called what's it called? Bikepackingroutes.com, I think it is.
Okay.
And they put together a lot of the tougher off-road routes, so that their routes tend to be, a bit more hardcore.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this one will be.
And but this is a new route that's just being put together, and they're publishing the book in the next month or so, I think.
And it's following the old route of the Pony Express.
That used to. I mean, it was in the days before the railroads actually finished getting across America. So it follows the route that the old telegraph ponies used to take to give messages to the Californians and back again. So
quite dangerous at the time, I believe.
Wow, that does sound amazing. Oh well, you'll have to come back to the festival once you've done that and give us another talk.
If you ever see us again. Somewhere in the desert.
Well, I'd just like to say on behalf of everyone who's been watching today, thank you very much for taking the time to come here and talk to us all and share your photos and your stories. We've all really enjoyed it. Everyone in the chat seems to be enthusing about what they've heard. And so I'll just say that, as I said, a copy of this chat transcript will be sent to Bernie and Sarah. So please do let them know, give them your appreciation, your silent appreciation, because unfortunately we can't have a round of applause. But thank you very much. A quick note from me is the next talk, the 10th talk of this Cycle Touring Festival, will be Rob Ainsley tomorrow, 8 p.m. And the title of the talk is Austria is Very Flat, a Highland Bike Crossing. So I assume that title is tongue-in-cheek. I haven't seen the flat part of Austria, but I will tune in just to find out what he's talking about there. So thank you all very much, and look forward to seeing everyone on another talk later on in the Cycle Touring Festival. Have a good evening, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.